Welcome to Highly Detailed News. Today we welcome Albert Lee, who is running for Congress in Oregon's 3rd District. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Before we focus on cannabis, can you tell us about yourself and what your campaign is about, and why you think Oregon's 3rd District is the most effective place for you to make those changes?
Certainly. Thank you. So my name is Albert Lee. I'm running for the right to represent the people of the 3rd District of Oregon. I'm running because I believe that democracy requires choice. It's something that we haven't had here in over a generation. We face a series of crises that have been allowed to fester and grow, including homelessness, the lack of affordable housing and living wages, and the climate emergency that it's only gotten lip service. A little bit about me. I come from a background where I'm a 6th-generation American and an immigrant at the same time. I was born in South Korea, where my African-American Army dad met my Korean mom during the middle of the Vietnam War. Now, I grew up in working-class St. Louis through a lot of structural and systemic racism. I watched as people within my family and others got mixed up within, the criminal justice system that we have. So it's something that I would love to talk about in depth when we're talking about cannabis, for instance.
No, absolutely.
So, growing up, I'm a 1st-generation college grad, served in the Army myself, 1st-generation law school grad. Now, the 3rd District of Oregon, I think that it is time that we diversify our representation here in the most diverse district of our state. It's time that we uplift some new voices from some other backgrounds, from some other lived experiences to represent us. And I think that when you talk in particular about cannabis, it is time that we have a voice that comes from a different perspective, a voice that comes from the people who are most marginalized, who are most impacted by our war on drugs, by our structures that have been made to simply oppress a good swath of our American population.
No, absolutely. I think you used the term faux-aggressive in a previous interview that I absolutely loved. And the exact way to put it. So being from a progressive state that has legal cannabis, what changes do you think needed to be made to cannabis policy, both locally and at the federal level, to try and bring us to some change?
Yeah, so first of all, we need to take a look at how we're going about decriminalizing and legalizing. Oregon is one of the first states that decriminalized back in 1996, 1997, somewhere in there. I think California beat us by a year or two.
Little.
But even during that time where it was decriminalized, people were still being affected. They were still being arrested for possession, small possession. And quite frankly, the darker you were, the more likely you were going to get the ire of the police. And the lighter and the wealthier you were, the more likely you were going to get let off scot-free. Now, we've come to a point where here in our state, we're legal, as is California. But the people who have been able to take advantage of that, again, have come from wealthier backgrounds, have come from the dominant culture. And, folks that remain in jail, for the most part, come from the marginalized areas. We need to do something about that. We need to make it so that we expunge records, okay? Because again, the people that are impacted are those that are darker, the black and brown folks. We need to find a way to bring some parity and equity when it comes to cashing in on an industry that is going to, quite honestly, see exponential growth when it becomes nationally legalized. And that's the other thing. We do need to legalize it nationwide because we have a conflict of law right now where it comes from between the states and the federal government. So that prevents us from having legal trade across state borders. It prevents us from having a banking system. It prevents us from having this be a fully legitimate business where people can be afforded the same protections that other businesses have. So I think I kind of answered a little bit about the local and the national all at once there.
Yeah, it's a very intertwined issue, and unfortunately, we do have to address a lot of places to really bring some equity to the space.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you touched on was being a person of color, you are more likely to be affected by this. According to the ACLU, they released some recent data from 2018. In Oregon, if you are black, you are 1.8 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis than if you are white. How would we be able to work to actually correct this? Would we be able to bring some sort of parity to these numbers so they actually reflect a true population? Or do we have to just really strive to just kind of move beyond it and move forward and make it so that people aren't affected? Because I mean, if you're going to be able to be arrested for selling illegal cigarettes, how is illegal cannabis not going to be the next trouble?
Well, look, I mean, we've got to take a look at our entire criminal justice system. We have to look at it from top to bottom, from the point of arrest all the way to the point of prosecution. And the fact of the matter is, you're right. You know, if you can get a death sentence for selling illegal cigarettes, we're not anywhere near where we need to be. We need to make sure that not only do we correct the enforcement, we have to correct the status and the laws as they are. We have to change the hearts and minds of people. And in addition to that, we need to repair the damage that is caused, because not only is the damage on the individual, but everyone within the circle of that individual. So if we incarcerate a young man, his family suffers, right? There's a child that doesn't have a father figure, and there are so many negative externalities that roll off of that, and that becomes a generational issue. And it only reinforces, stereotypes. It only reinforces the racism that is held.
Yeah. Unfortunately, what we're seeing, I was trying to find tracking data, seems less than 2% of people that are eligible to have had their records expunged have actually gone through and done it. There have been some processes that they're trying to attempt to make that a little more effective. How do we remove some of those barriers to allow people to actually participate? Because you're talking even just a basic delivery job, you wouldn't be allowed to get insurance because of previous convictions still.
You're right. There's a cost associated with getting that whole process of expungement. You know, for a lot of folks that are outside of law is completely foreign, right? That whole process is foreign to folks, and it's costly. We need to make it so that we provide expungement without cost, especially for folks that are of less means. We need to make it so that we can correct those wrongs, because again, the impacts, you got to look at the impacts. You got to look at who has been affected and how they've been affected. I think that you have to take a look at, providing funds to provide the expungement process. And, I know there are a lot of different legal aid groups and associations that would love to help take part in that. But the bottom line is, we have to right the wrongs that were made and from the structural and systemic racism. And, we're talking about things that started not in the 1960s with the war on drugs with Nixon, but earlier into the 1910s and 1920s. We had a system that, you already know the history of it all.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately we were talking about currently what we're fighting. We outlawed the private prison practice here in the state of California, and then they sued us on state contracts. And so how do we make these changes that so desperately need to happen when unfortunately it does seem that legally they were able to throw so much extra resources into the fight and just overwhelm any government agency?
We've got to fight with all our might. We've got to bring these things to light. And I think that we need to push even further. I think we need to start talking about things like prison abolition. I think, when I first heard of prison abolition, I was like, what? That seems a little far out there. Similarly, like when a lot of people first heard about Medicare for all, they were like, well, that sounds like it's really far out there. But when you start looking at the history and how it's been implemented in other countries, and you ask yourself really the question of what our criminal justice system, what purpose does it serve? We call them correctional facilities, but are they really correcting? We call them rehabilitation centers. Are they really rehabilitating? And then you think about, things like the documentary, The 13th Amendment, right? We talk about how this has just been a transition from slavery to slavery. It's about the oppression of people, especially when you're looking at race and when you're looking at socioeconomic background. It's about control.
Poverty is a huge part of it for a lot of people as well. And
I'm sorry?
Poverty.
Yes.
And being able to maintain this level of impoverished people, so you have a renter class, so you have all of this. It's
exactly, and you can look at so many different factors. I mean, we have a minimum wage that has remained flat for 40 years, and the buying power of that minimum wage has actually decreased dramatically. That's one of the things that I point out. My first W-2 job was in 1991. I was 15 years old. Minimum wage in Missouri at that time was $3.80. I think I even got paid less than that. I think I got paid a student wage of $3.12. And that sounds like it's a meager wage, but guess what? If you put that $3.80 into a real money calculator, the buying power of that $3.80 is something like $13.10 an hour.
Right.
Now, here in Oregon, in Portland, in progressive Portland, our minimum wage is $12.25. So I made more effectively in 1991 in Missouri, which is a very conservative state, than our progressive minimum wage is here in Portland, and probably almost double what the national minimum wage at $7.25 is. That kind of suppression of the working class of people is there for control. You know, if you can't support your family on one full-time job, you're working 2-3 jobs and barely making it with roommates. That's a way of control. And for those that are trying to break through it by other means, they get caught into a criminal justice system that is unforgiving.
Right. And I absolutely do not condone anyone going outside the law to do anything, but we have to recognize that from a legal standpoint, insider trading, all of these things, people are hit with what they were raised to be aware of. This is clearly wrong, but because somebody's wealthy, they're allowed to engage in these actions that are obviously going to put anybody else of not privileged behind bars.
Look, I mean, you can look at it any which way you cut it. The privileged have always been a way able to skirt the law. They've been able to change the laws. I mean, for instance, back in the 70s, stock buybacks, that was illegal. You know what it was called? It was called stock manipulation.
Yeah.
But apparently that's completely legal and okay to do now. And we have a situation like with our airline industry, who's coming out with hat in hand asking for $50 billion after they've, done a stock buyback to increase the value of their stock so that their CEO can reap the benefits of that. And now they're laying off people and coming to the government for socialism.
No, exactly.
The wealthy are always about socialism for the top, and just brutal capitalism for the rest of us.
No, I mean, I hope that at some point they have to realize that you need a social safety net so you can sell people things. Like, there's going to have to be some basic level of understanding that we're all in this together. You can't continually deprive.
Well, I mean, when you're a billionaire and you're building a bomb shelter for the apocalypse, I guess
maybe you've already bought it all. I don't know.
And here's the thing: do you really want to live in a world where you're underground while the rest of us are fighting tooth and nail to survive? And by the way, who's going to service your needs there while you're in that underground shelter for the next 50 years?
Right? No, I mean, enough of us realize that we're all fairly quarantined together now. That A, it's time to let people out of jail for stupid things because it's got to stop. And B, we're all so important to the economy, and there are certain people that just aren't contributing, and we have to level that out if this country has a chance.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, the bottom line is we do not treat all humans equally. We do not value all human life equally. The folks that are in prison, for the most part, didn't get the right breaks, didn't get the right treatment, and found themselves in the system. You look around the world globally, and there's actually dollar figures that we put on people's heads. When our military inadvertently kills an Afghan, the price that we pay is $3,000 or something like that. And if it's an Iraqi, we give them $12,000. And then when we have a mercenary, what do we call them? We give them a euphemism.
Military contractors now, right?
Military, they're mercenaries. But if they die, they're worth $3 or $4 million, right?
Yeah.
This kind of injustice, both locally and globally, is one of the reasons why we have so much conflict. Is because we simply do not value life on an equitable basis.
No, we definitely have to make sure that the oil wars don't turn into lithium wars. We have to make sure that all of these things go. But
well, I mean, you bring up lithium, and I appreciate that, because one of the things that I'm fighting for is that we stop having this 20th century idea when it comes to innovation. We've got plenty of people that want to build the next battery electric vehicle, but what that means is we continue to have individual solutions to collective problems instead of focusing on the next electric vehicle, personal vehicle, we should be looking at how are we going to transform our infrastructure so that we have mass public transportation that's for free for all, that is electrified, that is going to service more people more efficiently instead of, an electric car in every yard, right?
Right.
Um, yeah,
That's
because
no, you're talking. Portland has a very, very good electric transportation system comparatively. From what I remember, we've struggled to get Los Angeles up to par. We're years and years behind. It seems always. It's
well,
insane.
100 years ago it was a different story. Every one of your highways was a rail system for intracity rail.
Right.
But I think it was GM and Goodrich or one of the tire companies that bought all that up to rip up the rail, put down buses to eventually get people stuck on cars.
Bullets, quote unquote, rip up critical infrastructure for the sake of nothing for recycling. But yeah, they
For profit for corporations, and that's the bottom line. One of the big things that I talk about generally when I'm talking about running for office is that the biggest linchpin in all of the crises we face, be it the endless wars, the lack of Medicare for all, the immense wealth gap, the climate concerns, all these things have the same issue, and that's money in politics. We've got very wealthy special interests who effectively bribe both sides of the aisle to do what's most profitable for them, to convert our collective resources into the profits of the few. So, we have endless war because somebody makes money off of the military-industrial complex, and somebody has an interest in oil. We have the lack of Medicare for all because, again, the private health insurance industry, the average CEO makes $30 million a year. I think that they want to kind of keep that,
right.
and they want that parasitic waste and to profit on the death and illness of people, when it only makes sense to have a collective solution like single-payer universal Medicare for all.
No, 100%. A lot of these proof positives are very, very evident when everybody realizes everything shuts down without just a little bit of healthcare that could have been preventative.
Yeah.
We're facing so many people dying at a far greater rate here because people are afraid to go to the hospital. And
Well, I
that
got to
is
tell you,
insane.
yeah, I got to tell you, there as horrible as this COVID crisis is, it is doing something to demonstrate a lot of different things that are wrong. Number one, the for-profit private health insurance industry is failing us, and that if you really want to handle on this, you need to take care of everyone, right?
Yeah.
It also demonstrates the immense inequity when it comes to class and race, when we have a majority of the patients that are dying are Black and brown individuals.
Yeah.
In Michigan, I think African-American population makes something like 14% of the population, but 70% of the cases. That demonstrates the environmental racism. It demonstrates the redlining. It demonstrates all kinds of issues that we face, the inequities that face folks that can't work from home, right? If you're working a service industry job, if you're working at 7-Eleven, you can't do that from home.
No.
And in addition to that, it demonstrates some positive things also. We talk about how our government says it's impossible to do anything about our environment, and that ending fossil fuels is just ludicrous. Well, this crisis has kept us home,
Right.
kept us from using fossil fuels. And within a matter of weeks, we've seen dramatic changes within the air quality around the globe. It is not a matter of can we, it is a matter of do we have the political will.
Absolutely.
So again, you got to look at some of, again, I'm not promoting the COVID crisis, but at the same time, I'm saying observe, take a look at some of the things that this thing is demonstrating to us. It is a wake-up call to say, hey, we can do better and we should do better. And if we don't, there's a lot of hell to pay.
No, absolutely. It's incredibly unfortunate, but these things could have been handled a lot better. And we have to remind people of that other countries aren't having these issues we are having. And so hopefully we can actually grow and learn from our mistakes. But I'm usually far too optimistic. So move right along here. We have last month in Oregon, the state had its highest month of legal cannabis sales ever, 84.5 million. people say that was because of stockpile buying.
Yeah.
Now that cannabis has been deemed essential in many states, how do we end the stigma to get the rest of the country to realize its medicinal and social benefits?
Well, not only was cannabis made essential, I think alcohol was too, and I would argue that alcohol is made essential because of the simple fact that we have a lot of folks that are dependent on it. It is a
Agreed.
drug, no other like and many others, and quite frankly, I think is one of the most dangerous. When it comes to cannabis, I think that a lot of us have had a lot of anxiety over these last couple of weeks, and it has gone to soothe a lot of people's anxieties. Working from home, I think a lot of people are imbibing and using it for the medicinal applications that are necessary. And I think that over the course of the last decade, we have seen a big shift in the social consciousness of the country when it comes to cannabis, because it took years and years of propaganda to demonize it, and with a lot of racial undertones. And it has taken the legalization in 4 states that has kind of domino effect across the country. And I think that all of the fears, all of the stereotypes, all of the nightmarish scenarios that people were talking about just haven't occurred, and people are saying, "Well, I guess we're wrong." So I think that the natural progression, I think that it is coming along on its own. Quite frankly, I see it nationalizing, being legal nationwide really soon, regardless of which part of the corporate party is in power.
Yeah, I genuinely hope that depending on who it is, we can intelligently move forward, because there are some scheduling issues. I would hate to give the pharmaceutical companies the only license for that completely. So I am cautiously hopeful that we will help continue to see the people, because they've screwed up in several states in the switch over from medical to legal. And I think they have to tune their tax ideals a little bit more, because
Right.
it does seem to be overtaxed, and that's encouraging the illicit market to just grow at a rampant pace, it seems, in a lot of these states now. So I
Well, I
think
mean,
we'll have
here
to.
in our state, you can grow your own. So,
Luckily, we can here too. So uh, that is
um,
always the helpful choice.
yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I do see a trend, because I see it being legalized state by state, sort of like it did was province by province in Canada. They have a lot less provinces than we have states here, but I think when we get to a certain threshold, it's just going to move over. Um, and for states like California and Oregon, it's going to obviously benefit us more so than other states, because like there's vineyards in every state of the country, including Alaska. You don't drink Alaskan wine, right?
Right. Although, ironically, climate change made New Mexico have some of the best wine this year. So if
Well,
you're looking at
well, there you go.
sparkling, so hey, who knows? I won't jinx on it. Like, if we're talking strictly exports, I'm sure Alaska's indoor would spank a lot of people. So I wouldn't say no to trying it. But as we've stated before on this show, cannabis policy is frequently emboldened by asset forfeiture and minimum imprisonment contracts for private for-profit prison companies.
Hmm.
How do we work to end these conflicting interests to truly squash this out? Because I don't feel we can actually end the war on anything. They'll find some way else to incarcerate somebody if
It's
we
abs-
use the tool.
it's absolutely disgusting when we talk about the for-profit prison system. I heard an anecdote the other day. One of my staffers was telling me that they have a friend who's a prison guard at a for-profit prison in Wisconsin or Minnesota somewhere. And now, number one, they're a prison guard because they're trying to pay off their student debt.
Right.
So I'm not going to, criticize their livelihood in the conditions that they're in. But what they were saying was that they've been overtly and tacitly cajoled into baiting prisoners into getting into altercations so that they can extend their stay. How
Wow.
sick is that?
That's insane. I'm
Yeah.
disgusted and sadly not surprised, because it seems on every level, somebody's pushing a quota. So it's disgusting. And how do we make that stop?
Additionally, there are many states that have entered into contracts with these for-profit prisons where they have to guarantee a
Right.
certain occupancy.
Right.
So, I mean, that in
Go
itself
find what
incentivizes
that answer is.
more incarceration, and you know, that is just wholly unhealthy. It's part of a system that is geared toward imprisoning and disenfranchising Black and brown bodies. And then when you look at the states around the country, many of the states do not restore voting rights, right?
Right.
So it's a 1-2 thing, right? Number one, these prison populations get counted as in representation for rural areas to beef up the rural area, the conservative, without an ability to vote.
Right.
And then when these people are emancipated from prison, in many states, they're not allowed to vote again, or they have to plead for their restoration of their voting rights, like in Florida.
Yeah. And pay excessive fees typically as well.
With inordinate fees, with legal, you know, so everybody's got their hand out in the whole legal system to cash in on people. And then you talk about things like the prison phone system. You know, $15 for 15 minutes or something ridiculous like that. This is literally taking food out of kids' mouths so that they can have a relationship with their incarcerated loved ones. That's sick.
It is.
We need to do everything we can to end all of those things. We need to do everything we can to shine a light on what this whole dirty business is all about. We need to get the for-profit prisons out of business. We need to take them out of business. Now, as I understand, a lot of that is state contracts. So
Right.
this is going to have to be done on the state level. It's going to have to be done with legislation on the state level. But I think that a lot it can go a long way to have your federal representatives shine a light, use the bully pulpit to discuss the atrocities. I mean, one of the biggest atrocities that we have, and I'm incredibly ashamed to have to admit this, is that we are now, after Louisiana has decided to not do this anymore, we're the only state where you can have a non-unanimous jury call you, pass judgment on you.
Yeah, that's insane.
So it is insane. And so Oregon has got the notoriety, the infamy for being the last state to allow this. We've got to stop that. And again, I think it goes a long way to use the bully pulpit of a federal position to do so and to right that injustice.
No, absolutely. Before we close this out, was there anything that we missed? I feel like we bounced around a lot, and we have so many issues we have to fix almost immediately before they are overwhelmed by some other force, unfortunately. So anything that we really missed?
So here's the thing. The one thing that I want to, I guess, put a sharp point on is this. We have good representation, right? We have good representatives. The person that I'm challenging has been a decent vote. But being a decent vote is not the same thing as pushing for and being a leader and really fighting for the rights of folks. I think that in order for us to move forward, we need to have the perspective, different perspectives. You know, if we're all cut from the same cloth, we're not going to have a diversity of ideas, thoughts, and opinions that are going to get us to the workable solutions that we need. Here in our state, we have had 64, I think about 64 representatives for the state of Oregon in its entire history as a state. Now, out of those 64, there's only been one who has been an immigrant. There's only been one who has not been white. And that was the same person. Okay. Here in the most diverse district of our state, I think it's time that we uplift some new voices from some other backgrounds, from some other experiences, who understand things like, you know, my family faced domestic violence, which in turn had me and my mom and my sister homeless for part of the time when we were in high school. I went to 5 different high schools in 3 different states. It was a profound experience that changed my whole political perspective. You know, I have the perspective of a black man, having been stopped over 40 times in my life, with so many broken taillights that were not broken. Um, I think that, growing up in a working class background, having served in the military, these are things that are very important for somebody who wants to represent the people, all the people within the third district, and not just those at the very top. Uh, we have had an oligarchy. We have had a system where we've had a bunch of millionaires, a bunch of a very elite people, mainly white, mainly older, who have been paternalistic, who want to demonstrate and discuss things that they feel ought to be happening for us. It's time that we actually have someone who has the perspective, who has the lived experience to shoulder that and to push it forward, who's actually going to fight harder because, quite frankly, I know the struggle. And so I'm asking people to vote for me here in the May 19th primary, because while our incumbent has been a good vote, it's time for new leadership. It's time for a fresh pair of legs that are going to go in there and continue the fight and push forward for the needs that have been unaddressed, for the people who have been silent, who have not had a voice.
No, amazing. Real quick, tell us where we can go and support your campaign, and if there's anything we can do to help you right now, since we can't really go knock on doors.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you can find more information about the campaign and what we're doing at albertlee2020.com. You are free to contribute there as well. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. A wide variety of platforms for you, and you can hear some of the things that we have. And quite frankly, I try to answer as much as possible, and we have a good staff that also answer and bring things to my attention as well. But we're here to serve the people. I mean, that's what it's about. It's about public service from a public servant. We should stop putting these people on pedestals, these politicians, and we should start bringing in citizen representatives who are not going to be above the people, but are going to be with the people.
No, absolutely amazing. Thank you so much again for taking your time to spend with us. It's really a pleasure been talking with you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, stay safe out there, really.
You too. Take care.
Bye.